Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure welcoming Dr. Irfanullah Farooqi for a session on discerning dialogue in Nehru's reflections on religion, culture, and secularism. Dr. Irfanullah Farooqi is currently working as an assistant professor at the Department of Sociology at South Asian University. Dr. Farooqi, you have up to 2 hours for this session, and you're welcome to conduct it however you like it. Over to you, sir.
Oh, thank you, Bezat. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. No, please be assured I won't take 2 hours. I assure you as honestly as I can. So I'm grateful to In Dialogue Foundation for giving me this opportunity. There are a couple of things that I want to, sort of, as a matter of disclaimers, I want to kind of put on the table right at the outset, so as to avoid any embarrassment later. So the first thing is that this is, so Behzad has already kind of, I'm sure, even if he hadn't spoken about the title, that wouldn't really have made any difference. I'm convinced all of you know what the discussion is going to be about. So this is essentially a certain kind of an attempt at, discerning, finding instances of dialogue in several reflections of Nehru vis-a-vis culture, politics, religion, secularism, etc. So the first thing that I want to put on record most earnestly is that this is not at all a just introduction to Nehru's ideas on religion, on culture, on secularism, on politics, not at all. In fact, I'll go even further and I'll say this is not even a comprehensive account of these, or to go even further, it's not even a comprehensive account of even one of these. So I'm not even claiming that I'm presenting a comprehensive analysis or reflection on Nehru's ideas on religion. I mean, one needs actually a semester to do that because Nehru wrote a great deal on some of these things. These themes remain very, very central to his thought as a statesman, as a thinker, as an architect of modern India. Having said this, I would also like to point out that I am not at all trying to sort of glorify Nehru. That's definitely not what I am interested in. I happen to be reasonably aware of Nehru's limitations as a statesman, Nehru's limitations as a thinker, as a leader. So this is not at all an attempt at glorifying or kind of praising endlessly Nehru. But yes, what I am interested in is something that's sort of, I think it's a mixture of the personal and the intellectual. And so the reason why I am inclined to kind of talk about these reflections has to do with the fact that I am, and I won't mince, I mean, I'll be very honest about it. I'm hopelessly and irredeemably, in a way, I'm in love with simple prose. I just cannot resist falling for a prose that is free of jargons. And free of jargons, but at the same time, you can have absolutely average prose as well that is free of jargons. So I'm not at all talking about that prose. So free of jargons, but more importantly, has some profound and insightful things to say, to convey. So that's where I'm coming from. And maybe this bias, quote unquote, on my part has to do with my years at the university. Because, and I'm sure this is no news to most of you, universities, unfortunately, universities take pride in kind of pushing us to read stuff that is exceedingly jargonized for the most part. So while doing our master's, MPhil, and PhD, of course, on our own, we were doing that. So, we were made to go through dozens of readings, one after another, that were not even remotely reader-friendly. Which is why I have this unconditional love, for people like Gandhi, Tagore, Nehru, Ambedkar, Krishnamurti, and so on. I mean, within the Indian context. Of course, in the non-Indian context, you have another list. So that's where I'm coming from. So the readings, the PDF that I'm sure Behzad shared with you, is to do with that bias on my part. And lastly, and I also must point this out, that there is also something that I am genuinely interested in when I circulate a reading of the kind that I did. So the purpose behind choosing readings of this sort is to kind of facilitate something that is much more vital and that is exceedingly crucial to our political existence in the times we live in. It is very important for us as students, and I consider myself very much a student, to kind of read credible stuff on religion, on culture, on politics, on communalism, on secularism, and inform ourselves. And perhaps start with stuff that is not very high-end and very scholarly. And then that could perhaps be a preface to something that is more, intellectually speaking, more demanding. So my purpose is to kind of also think about this. So this is more of an exercise as some sort of a preface to a journey that in all likelihood some of you might embark upon in days to come, years to come, months to come, depending. So that's what it is. And in the next 45 minutes or so, I don't think I should go beyond that. At max, it should be an hour, not more than that, because I would love to hear comments from you and questions. So my intention, I mean, I'm just sort of, I'm very, in all earnestness, I consider myself as a student of politics, society, interface in particular, and student of life in general. And that's what I'll be as I speak. So I am, in all earnestness, I'm keen on putting forth the unmistakably presence of dialogue in these reflections as a student of politics, society, interface. All right, now I'll just straight away, dive into the theme. And I don't really want to get into the question of secularism as such, but maybe in the course of discussing some of the arguments that are there in Nehru's reflections, I will come to that. So let me kind of, take up each of these brief reflections one by one and share with you some of the core arguments that are there. And in these arguments, in what possible ways can we understand the presence and the centrality of dialogue, right? And now, of course, needless to say, I am not at all trying to pitch dialogue as a policy-related matter. I am actually placing dialogue as a much more human aspect of day-to-day existence, something without which, in all likelihood, human society will not survive, right? So dialogue in that sense is absolutely indispensable to our existence, and particularly our existence in the modern world, where we are kind of surrounded by identities and claims and assertions and genealogies of all sorts. So the first piece is titled, "What is Religion?" Let me start with something that I find quite, first time I read it back during my master's days. So this was, of course, a reading that we did for a course, Politics and Society in India. This was many years ago. So I won't say when it was, because then I'll suddenly look very, very old. But, it was way back. Nehru, most of us, and I'm assuming, it's part of the national common sense. Nehru is considered as this absolutely brazen, unapologetic, secular person who was an atheist. And according to Ashish Nandy, there was hardly any distinction between Nehru's private performance or private life and public performance, right? Unlike the likes of Jinnah and Savarkar and Indira Gandhi, as in Ashish Nandy's very, very interesting typology, where you have leaders who are religious in public and atheist in their day-to-day life, in private life. And you have leaders who are religious or a little particular about religion in their private lives, but are absolutely secular in their public lives. And you have leaders, and that's where Nehru comes in. You have leaders who are secular in the public domain and also in the private domain. So it's kind of part of the national common sense that Nehru is someone who had an absolutely principled disregard for religion. There is a degree of truth to that. There is no denying that Nehru did consider religion as, something that we should, and in fact, in one of the readings, Nehru does say that, it is something that we should just do away with altogether. However, when you read this particular, it's a short reflection, what is religion? One thing that immediately strikes you, provided you are, sincerely, you are that reader, the much needed reader. One thing that immediately strikes us is that there is a certain kind of dialogue that Nehru invests in vis-a-vis religion. Nehru is not dismissing religion. Right? Nehru is engaging with religion. And that's very, very unlike what the national common sense suggests. So if you read this particular piece, there is a way in which Nehru is trying to kind of come to terms with what all religion means, the kind of bewildering variety it has, the confusion that this variety creates, and all kinds of complications that arise as a result of that. And on top of that, this peculiar emotional association that people have with religion. As a consequence, there is simply no possibility of a dispassionate study or analysis of religion, and so on. So there is a certain kind of quest on Nehru's part. He is trying to kind of understand religion. He could have easily dismissed it as something that had nothing to do with modern secular liberal existence, but Nehru is not doing that. There is, of course, one can have issues with the ways in which Nehru is formulating his thesis here, but one thing that immediately strikes us as we, go from one line to another and move from one paragraph to the next one, one thing that quite, throughout it remains with us is that Nehru is trying to kind of engage with religion. It's not really dismissal in that sense. Now, Nehru talks about a variety of meanings, as I said, and then on top of that, something that really makes it much worse is that there is this strong emotional response that people have vis-a-vis religion. So that kind of makes things really, really difficult and terrible. And then, and as a result of that, and Nehru, we all know, is a hopeless rational. So, he is all for a dispassionate study, a dispassionate analysis, but religion creates a kind of sentimentality as a result of which you can't really have a dispassionate analysis study. So that concerns him. And in that regard, he talks about the fact that we should go for a word that has a more limited meaning, right? Because religion essentially is just, it means everything and anything in the world. And therefore, we should rather think about something else. And he proposes a range of words, ethics, etc. Although I think he's being a little, I wouldn't use the word naive, but I think he's a bit hasty there because even these words actually have a variety of meanings and we know very well. Now, one thing that particularly strikes me every time I read this reflection is Nehru's idea of, because Nehru, while he has talked about what kind of confusion religion leads to, he kind of draws our attention to what he means by religion. So it turns out the man did not dismiss religion after all. There was a certain meaning that Nehru entertained vis-a-vis religion, and his subscription to Gandhi's idea, his subscription to John Dewey's formulation, and more importantly, his pretty much unconditional subscription to Roma Rolla's formulation tells us that Nehru did entertain a certain philosophy, a certain sentimentality vis-a-vis religion. And Nehru says that religion for him is a certain kind of inner development. Now, that's a very interesting phrasing. Now, how do we understand inner development? What exactly does it mean? What does it mean for a thing to lead to some kind of inner development? Let's say we are to kind of think about it as something that is leading to self-realization or self-awakening or a deeper understanding of who we are. Now, if you were to think about these references in terms of the Nehruvian reference, which is inner development, that again, something that comes out very clearly is that it suggests a perpetual dialogue that's happening within an individual. So religion, in a certain sense, should be something that does not lead to a finality. but something that keeps you on the move, something that is constantly urging you, pushing you towards something better, something that is more fine-tuned, more nuanced, and perhaps more profound. So that's one thing that, that's one thing that I thought about when I was reading this piece, particularly in relation to this setting, right? In relation to our conversation. So that's one. That religion as inner development straight away takes us to this primacy or centrality of dialogue, because self-realization, and we know this very well, not just in the context of modern rational stuff, but more importantly, if you think about a range of literature that comes from traditional sources, whether we're talking about Sufism or we're talking about the Upanishadic wisdom, we are essentially, self-realization is invariably something that suggests a certain dialogue, where within the self, there's a certain conversation that's going on, and this conversation is an endless conversation. And as a result, what is happening is that there is no end to that self-realization. And there are very few who end up realizing the self, and they essentially become the likes of Buddha and whatnot. So that's one. Then there is another kind of reference to dialogue, but it's not really as profound as the previous one, which is a dialogue or a certain kind of a correspondence, a certain kind of an exchange between the inner and the outer. Because what Nehru is doing here is he's being very intelligent here. He's in a very smart way. Nehru is actually pitching his own ideas. He's kind of placing his own understanding, imposing, I would say rather, his own understanding on us, on his readers, where he says that there has to be a conversation between the inner and the outer. And here comes the development messiah, Nehru, who says that, unless you have a certain degree of outer development, you will not have this inner development happening, right? So you need to have a certain degree of, and here development, of course, is infrastructural development, where, of course, Nehru did talk about social welfare, poverty, etc. But we know that Nehru's ideas vis-a-vis development were too grand to be to be entertained in a country like India. But anyways, so this is the other thing that Nehru talks about, a certain kind of an exchange between the inner and the outer. So that's another reference to dialogue. An outer change as a certain kind of a projection of the inner development, right? So he is, but as I said, that this reference to, or this discerning of dialogue is not really as convincing as the previous one. Then there is a way in which, and I just don't want to talk about all kinds of, references. There are some interesting references, but because we are concerned more particularly about dialogue, there's a way in which Nehru talks about freedom in this particular piece. And when you try to kind of engage with that, with the idea of freedom as it is placed in the text, right, alongside the question of inner development, what straight away strikes you is that there's a way in which freedom is also, I think someone was not on mute. Okay. So there's a way in which, freedom is also conceptualized as a state of affairs where free and fearless dialogue is possible, right? So unless it's a free society, you will not really have the kind of development that Nehru has in mind. And what does free society imply? Freedom, in a certain sense, implies the possibility, the freedom, and a certain kind of an absolutely fearless atmosphere where one could indulge in all kinds of conversations and exchanges. Now, and towards the end, because as I said, I'm just going to sort of draw your attention to some of the core points, because otherwise it'll take much longer than desired. Towards the end, when he's borrowing from Roma Rolla's definition of religion, and it's a fairly long but very promising articulation, in fact, in the beginning itself, Rolla says that it is not when he's defining religion, he says it is not the quality of thought. It is the quality of thought and not the objective, right? So it's not the end, but the means in a certain sense. And Nehru uses this And Nehru is, in a very intelligent way, he kind of seeks recourse to the Gandhian philosophy, where means are more important than the end. And we know very well, I mean, we've been told this repeatedly in our classrooms, the means end stuff in relation to Gandhian philosophy. Now, Nehru, again, if you were to think about the objective and the quality of thought, and you were to place dialogue in this scheme, then if you were to think about the primacy of objective, then what happens is that the centrality of dialogue is compromised. But if you think about the quality of thought, then what is happening is you're essentially entertaining, you're allowing the possibility of multiple ways of arriving, or multiple ways of engaging, or multiple ways of reflecting. So there is a certain kind of an attempt at, so when Nehru sides with Rollin's proposition that it is the quality of thought and not necessarily the objective that is more important in the context of religion, Nehru is again making a case for a dialogic religiosity, a religiosity that is more open to new developments, a religiosity that is not insecure, or that is not afraid of its, or let's say that's not insecure about its foundation, right? So that's that. Moving further, in fact, while I was reading this reminded me of, and some of you might have read this extraordinary text, Discovery of India. Now, in Discovery of India, one of the things that you again and again, and this is a text that one must discuss at some point in detail, there's a way in which, when you read Discovery of India, and of course it's written in a very different context, but in Discovery of India, there is something, how should I put it? The quest, for instance, and it also happens to be the title of a chapter, the second chapter, if I remember correctly. There is a certain kind of a quest on Nehru's part. So it is not a straightaway analysis or description of India, but it's a certain kind of an articulation where India is constantly emerging in newer ways. It's almost like you are running into new versions or new forms or new ideas of India, a civilization that is constantly in the making. And that is also something that suggests the centrality, because dialogue is also something that leads to a perpetual promise of discovery, right? So I just wanted to point that. Now, moving further, the next one is intolerance. Now, intolerance is again a very, very short piece. It's just a page long, or maybe page and a quarter. Now, if you think about it, and I don't really think it's news for any of you, I'm sure this is something that all of you are aware of and well aware of. If you think about the idea of intolerance, and in fact, back in 2015-16, there was an entire movement of sorts in India, where many artists and civil society activists and writers and thinkers had rallied around this concern that there is growing intolerance in India. And we had 3 rationalists killed in separate incidents, Kalburgi and Pansare, and then there's another fellow, I'm not able to place his name. And then a little later, 2 years later, Gauri Lankesh was murdered. And, a lot of people were talking about this growing intolerance. And what most of these people, or all of them, were suggesting, and I think something that Nehru is also pointing out, is that intolerance essentially suggests an absolute absence of, or a complete disregard vis-a-vis dialogue. Because if you're intolerant, then the first thing that I can say about you, or if I'm intolerant, the first thing that you can say about me without an ounce of doubt is that I'm absolutely averse to the idea of dialogue. Right? So intolerance in that sense. So the title itself kind of suggests a certain concern on Nehru's part as a statesman, as a leader, vis-a-vis this shrinking space for dialogue. I wouldn't say that dialogue was completely absent, but if intolerance, according to Nehru, if it wasn't checked in its tracks, then very soon dialogue would be a thing of the past. So intolerance straight away suggests a marked absence of dialogue, a complete disregard of dialogue, or a world or a situation wherein dialogue becomes absolutely meaningless. Right? There's just no There's no significance that is associated with something that is otherwise so distinctly human. Now, and in this particular piece, Nehru is concerned about how intolerance disrupts the national flow of life, or flow of national life, flow of national life. Now, once again, if you think about it, in what ways can we make sense of national life? And my apologies to participants from other parts of the world, but I'm afraid I have no other option but to kind of cite example from India, because that's where I am, and I know a little about the country I come from. So how do we think about national flow or national life vis-a-vis a country like India? Right? What exactly does national imply? Does national imply a certain kind of territorial integrity? Does national imply a certain kind of sovereignty? Does national imply a certain kind of political assertion, a certain kind of a dominant claim, a hegemonic, authoritative narrative? Or national implies a certain kind of plurality? Because this is something that many political scientists have been thinking about. How do we conceptualize unity in a country like India? Does unity necessarily imply homogeneity, or unity implies an endless dialogue between different cultures, between different groups and identities, right? So when Nehru was talking about national flow, my hunch is, and if I may be so bold so as to kind of indulge, my hunch is that he was essentially thinking about national flow as a perpetual flow of dialogues. Because if you don't have dialogues in the national life of India, then the national kind of collapses. In Nehru's view, the national collapses. So you will have the national flag, you will have national holidays, you will have all kinds of things, but the spirit will be dead. The spirit won't be there. It will be a lifeless claim, as it were, right? So this idea, national life as a perpetual flow of dialogues across groups, across identities, across people, and something that is, again, leading to an idea that is perpetually in the making. So one of the things that we also realize after reading the likes of Nehru and Tagore and also parts of Gandhi is that the national is not really a finished product. The national is not an end point in itself. The national is something that is always in the making, because these dialogues are constantly informing us in more profound ways who we are, what are our imperfections, and in what ways can we bring ourselves closer to the promise of difference, to the promise of mutual understanding, and so on. So the national is constant. It's not really something that is a finished product. It is not something that we have achieved or attained. It is something, according to Nehru, and definitely according to Tagore and Gandhi, it is something that is always in the making. And the only reference point in order to kind of substantiate that argument is that the national is invariably a result of an incessant flow of dialogues between different cultures. And the moment you stop these dialogues, what happens is you are essentially stopping the national life from blooming or flourishing, thriving. And what intolerance does is that it kind of serves as an obstacle, an impediment to these dialogues that are so fruitful and so beneficial to the health of the political, social, and cultural health of India. So that's that. Now, essentials of tolerance, of course, Nehru talks about. Then there is towards the end something that I just want to quickly flag before we move on to politics and religion. Nehru, when he's talking about the importance of tolerance, he's giving us two examples. And of course, he's predominantly concerned about the Hindu-Muslim problem because whether we like it or not, turns out secularism has nothing else to do. Secularism is hopelessly, assigned this task of sorting out differences between the Hindus and the Muslims, the majority community and the largest minority group of the country. Now, Nehru, of course, his examples also are coming from a certain concern that he has. So he has an example that talks about Hindu-Muslim in one way and then talks about Hindu-Muslim in another way. And he says that, if you think about why does intolerance exist or why do people become intolerant and what is it that we could do about intolerance, he says that, the primary reason is that we react. The primary reason is that we are not able to kind of hold ourselves from reacting. And we get carried away by emotions, by instincts, and there's a certain kind of sentimentality that gets the better of us, and then things are completely out of our hands. And the example that he's talking about that how, the Muslims do something and the Hindus get agitated, and then the Hindus do something and the Muslims get agitated, and then one thing leads to another, and after a point, it snowballs into something that is much more consequential, and the situation is completely beyond our hands. So the example that he has for us is the example of Muslims slaughtering cow and Hindus playing music, and particularly blowing the shankha outside the mosque, while crossing the mosque, some road where you have a mosque and Hindus are just passing by and they're playing music or they're blowing the shank. And Nehru has of course, I would say that Nehru is a bit naive here, but let's just go by the text. And Nehru says he expects the Hindus not to react to Muslims slaughtering cow. And he expects the Muslims not to react to Hindus playing music or blowing the shank. Now, to begin with, of course, these two quote unquote offenses or these two unacceptable acts are not necessarily at par. That's my reading of it. Slaughtering a cow is definitely not as concerning to Muslims as it is to Hindus. If you compare slaughtering a cow with blowing of the shank. But anyways, if we leave that aside and if we kind of hold our critical selves we just resist the temptation to critique Nehru for a moment. What it tells us is that, let's say if you don't react, then what happens? If you don't react, what is happening after that? So let's say there is a procession that's passing a mosque and people are playing music and people are blowing the shank and there are Muslims inside the mosque. And let's kind of, even accentuate the situation. Let's say that they're praying and let's say it's Friday prayer. We just make it as extreme as possible. Now, let's say they don't react. Now, what exactly is happening when you are not reacting? And what exactly is happening when you are reacting? And this is, again, where we get into the primacy of dialogue. If you're not reacting, there is a possibility of some kind of dialogue happening later. In any case, there is a dialogue that you are happening within your own selves. There's a dialogue that's happening within the community. And when you are when you are reacting, when you are kind of reacting instinctively, one thing that you are completely compromising on is dialogue. You're not at all taking a pause. You're not reflecting. You're not understanding the grave consequences of something that might seem rational at that moment. But then in the long run, it's going to be exceedingly problematic for vis-a-vis intercommunity relations and a very harmonious social political existence. And lastly, in relation to conversions, and Nehru has actually in many of his writings, he's talked about conversions. And it's a very unsettling and he just doesn't know how to engage with conversions. He just does not know how to kind of diagnose and present in a certain assessment of conversions. So for instance, whenever Nehru is talking about conversions, he really doesn't know which way to go. Because conversions, given the nature of Indian secularism, conversions is actually a very tricky bit. So on the one hand, so Nehru has issues with conversions. And in fact, there is another, in the next reflection, he talks about, mass conversions is problematic, but conversions are fine, which is a very unsettling proposition. One doesn't really know how to draw a line and what grounds mass conversions are a problem. We'll come to that. But conversions, according to Nehru, and if you read and you try to kind of place his anxiety and make sense of why is he worried about conversions, I think the act of conversion, what it does is not for the individual who's converting, but for the society around the individual. So let's say I am from religion A and I embrace religion B. Now, of course, it's an individual act. But as many sociologists and anthropologists and political scientists have also written about this, that conversion is not just an individual act, it has social repercussions. So for instance, in India, we say all religions are equal. Absolutely, that's the secular Indian secularism doctrine. That's the principle. All religions are equal in the eyes of the state. But when Ambedkar embraces Buddhism, leaves Hinduism, and it's a mass conversion. But forget mass conversion. Let's assume that it was just Ambedkar or any Dalit who embraces Buddhism or Christianity or any other religion. The point is, leaves Hinduism. What does this act imply? How does the society receive this? How is it perceived? So it is perceived in a certain inferiority, superiority scheme. That's the way in which it is perceived. So if I convert, then the religion I enter into, through my act of conversion, I'm suggesting that that religion is better as compared to the religion I was in. So the social reception of conversion is something that always remains a very tricky business, right? So I mean, while you are allowed to, you are free to, and you are absolutely at liberty to convert as often as you would like to. So in the morning, you could be a Muslim, and then throughout the day, you could just travel around, hop around as it were. And then by evening, you are a Muslim again. That's absolutely fine. But the point is that there's a way in which this act of conversion is received. And Nehru, when he was expressing or when he was putting on record his grievance, his issue, his concern with conversion, I suppose what he had in mind was that there's a way in which conversion problematizes the question of freedom in day-to-day life of citizens. Because while on the one hand, conversion, if I'm converting, I am exercising a certain right. I'm free to do that. And I must do that if I want to. But then what it also does is it also unsettles the idea of freedom in the broader political, cultural landscape. So conversion becomes a very tricky affair. And for Nehru, that's my hunch, and I might be completely mistaken, and I'll be more than happy to hear your thoughts on this. For Nehru, I suppose conversion is slightly problematic, or it's something that concerns him. He's not very happy about it because conversion, in a certain sense, unsettles the primacy of dialogue in day-to-day life. Because conversion, in a certain sense, marks an end to dialogue. It kind of takes you to a certain hierarchy that the person who converts subscribes to. And dialogue, as we know very well, is absolutely against hierarchy. Dialogue, one of the fundamental conditions of dialogue is that that the parties are at par, that there is equality, not just in terms of an idea, but in terms of an experiential thing. Okay. Now moving further, oh, good Lord, it's already 3:40. So politics and religion, right? So very quickly, Nehru is again, because this is the time when a lot of people are saying, so this is essentially just to kind of contextualize the reading. Untouchability is something that a lot of people are concerned about. And Congress, of course, Ambedkar has ripped apart Gandhi's moral claims in the early 30s because Gandhi stood for, I wouldn't use the word stood for, but he kind of defended, in a certain sense, the Varnashram scheme. And Ambedkar was making a case for separate electorates. And Gandhi went on fast unto death. It was an absolutely immoral fast unto death. Biographers have informed us about it. And Gandhi was, scarred for his life. He just couldn't come out of that immoral episode of his political and spiritual career. But then the Congress actually became a bit active because they did realize that it is something, it's a plank, and they must make use of it. Now, I really don't know how many leaders were genuinely into removal of untouchability, but Nehru, I'm assuming, is someone who was not really as much of a casteist as several other Congress leaders. So Nehru, so there was this, so untouchability was essentially to do with religion. And many sort of Sanatanists or, the Hindu leaders, as it were, or let's say heads of certain Hindu sects, they had serious issues with Congress entering into this. And again, they were pointing out that, boss, you are a political party and you should not really concern yourself with religious matters. Let us take care of this. This Varnashram business is essentially coming from the Vedas. And guess what? We are the custodians of the Vedas. So we'll look into this. Why don't you take care of your freedom nonsense and Swaraj and whatnot? Let us handle this. So the argument was, the principal formulation was that, a political party is not supposed to kind of enter into a religious domain. And this is, of course, a cardinal principle of secular politics, that politics and religion must be separated from each other, pretty much from the time of the French Revolution, but officially since the 1850s in Europe, and then later on imported to India. Now, Nehru, of course, is critiquing. His is a very powerful rebuttal to that assertion made by these religious leaders that, he says that when religion takes over all walks of life, and when religion, in fact, to borrow from him, when religion begins to encroach upon, there is an encroachment that is observed of all aspects of day-to-day life, all departments of life, then politics has no other option but to kind of, go head on, as it were, critique religion and put religion back in its place. And in that sense, it is, in a certain sense, politics as, a perpetual dialogue in that sense. Politics is not something that is only to do with its own domain, but something that will, as and when required, will step out of its domain and kind of, talk to other institutions. And also, when he talks about this very deep connection between secularism and total freedom, he is again talking about the ways in which the centrality of freedom, the centrality of dialogue in freedom is also something that needs to be brought in vis-a-vis the Indian secular doctrine, right? So this is something that I wanted to quickly point out. Now, the Sanatanists, it's a letter that Nehru wrote to Gandhi. And again, the context is the same. Nehru and Gandhi and Ambedkar had quite an episode, 1931, 31-32. And after that, Gandhi takes it upon himself to do something about untouchability. So he kind of, he fiercely gets into it, though not really as radically as Ambedkar wanted him to. But as a result, what happened was that many of these orthodox Sanatanists, they actually went against Gandhi, and Gandhi was ridiculed, and Gandhi was scolded and humiliated, not really the right word, but Gandhi was kind of charged of corrupting Hinduism. And Gandhi has written about this to Nehru, and Nehru is responding to that letter. And so in that letter, I am particularly interested in two things that Nehru talks about, given the theme that we are interested in. Nehru, while ridiculing the Sanatanists, in the beginning itself, I think it's on the first page, while ridiculing the Sanatanists, Nehru talks about, so he says that the Sanatanists are essentially, they are doomed because they are relics of a bygone era. These are his words, right? Sanatanists are relics of a bygone era. That's a very interesting way of sort of ridiculing the Sanatanists, or anyone who is very particular about religious essentials to the extent that is not at all entertaining any progressive move. But what is it that Nehru is suggesting through a statement of this kind? That is something that interests me as a student of politics. Now, when you say that the Sanatanists are relics of a bygone era, what Nehru is suggesting is that we are in an era that the Sanatanists don't belong to. So they might be living with us, but the mindset with which they live or with which they are living does not belong to the modern era. And Nehru, we know very well, was one heck of an advocate of modernity. So this absolute intolerance on the part of the Sanatanists, complete closure of dialogue, a complete disregard for dialogue, is, according to Nehru, something that happened in the past. Because the modern age is an age where if there is one thing that really kind of is pervasive, It's something, of course, Nehru is to a certain extent romanticizing it. Modern age is not just about dialogue, but also about suppression of dialogue. But Nehru, of course, being Nehru, he's kind of pitching a certain argument. So this idea that, the modern mind, for instance, the modern mind is essentially a dialogic mind. So Gandhi is a Hindu. Gandhi is a devout Hindu. Gandhi is someone who believes that without religion, human life is absolutely meaningless. Yet, for Nehru, Gandhi is not a problem because Gandhi is a dialogic character. Gandhi's mind is dialogic. And there are, one of the most fascinating relationships, or let's say intellectual exchanges that you have in the 20th century is between Gandhi and Nehru. They hardly agreed on anything. But Gandhi was someone who would always respond. I don't think there is any letter where Gandhi would say, all right, I rest my case. I'm not taking this any further. No. The other person will have to think about writing another letter. Gandhi was always ready, whether it was Tagore or Ambedkar. I think with Ambedkar, it did not really go that far because it was just finished, the whole business. But with Tagore during the non-cooperation movement and with Nehru on the question of village, on the question of village reconstruction program, Gram Sabha, Panchayat, on the idea of Swaraj, on the idea of religion, politics, morality, etc., coming together, and so on. So Nehru considered Gandhi, Nehru would always engage with Gandhi because Gandhi's mind was a modern mind. It was a dialogic mind. It was always willing to listen, to receive and build on that and present another argument. So it was a very interesting thesis, antithesis progression.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
Extremely sorry to barge in like that. I actually raised my hand. So
sorry,
I just wanted to ask something is that we are seeing the ideological difference between Nehru and Gandhi related to religion. And we also know that India has a unique adaptation of secularism. It's unlike the French secularism. So, sir, I just wanted to know why India felt a need to modify the secularism, because as far from my generation kind of agrees with what more Western secularism has an ideation about how religion should be exclusive of the state matters. So why India adapted this recognition of the religion even in the state matters when it comes to the ideation of Indian secularism?
All right. Zishan, if it's all right, can I respond to this once I'm done with the text?
Yes, sure, sir.
Okay. Please, my memory is an embarrassment. Just in case I forget, please remind me, okay? But I'll make sure I start with your question and then I'll attend to other comments and questions. But thank you for this. I'll keep this in mind. Okay, so very quickly, just to kind of, we are kind of heading towards the end now. So this whole Sanatanist thing is, again, Nehru's idea of a dialogic mind. The modern mind is dialogic and Sanatanists are relics of a bygone era. And therefore, there's just no point. In fact, Nehru also writes in the same letter, he says that, for all you know, and he's telling this to Gandhi, that, not a single Sanatanist will convert after reading Harijan. You might keep writing all kinds of progressive write-ups, but these Sanatanists, because it's a closed mind, right? And if it's a closed mind, no matter what you talk about, it's not going to affect them. It's almost like going back to this very wise parable that many of our elderly relatives use in our families, that anyone who's asleep can be woken up, but someone who pretends to be asleep, I'm sorry, that's not happening. You can't really wake up a person who's pretending to be asleep. And the Sanatanists, in a certain sense, in Nehru's scheme of things, were not at all willing to kind of engage in a discussion. The other thing is, lastly, in the context of Sanatanists, Nehru makes a very interesting remark, and he says that what we so far considered as tolerance was actually indifference. And I think we must think about this formulation. It's a very, very insightful formulation. And I think in the times we live in, 2021, it's as relevant as it was back in 1933. He says what we consider or what we thought was tolerance was actually indifference. So we live with each other, but the fact of the matter is we hardly care, right? We are hardly invested in each other's cultures, in each other's histories, in each other's trajectories. and concerns and grievances. So of course, things go the way they go. But when the ship hits the storm, well, that's when things are all over the place. We are never shoulder to shoulder. So it's actually more of indifference, right? And not necessarily tolerance. Can you just put yourself on mute? Okay, great. Okay, now in communalism and casteism, I just don't want to, I mean, there is already something that I have discussed. What does secular mean? Nehru talks about religion is not discouraged. And because religion is not discouraged, there is a perpetual conversation, dialogue with religion that's going on of the state, right? So the state is not completely disconnected from religion. There's a way in which there's an exchange. So this, in a certain sense, also brings us to Zishan's question, but I will resist the temptation. I will answer the question once I'm done with the text. Then lastly, conversion and mass conversions. So in this piece, Nehru says conversion is fine, but mass conversions is something that he doesn't really understand. Now, why would Nehru have issues with mass conversion? Let's say if 100 people, 200 people, 500 people are converting to Christianity, right? So and let's say there's just one individual who converts. Now, Nehru is fine with the latter. Nehru is absolutely not at home with the former. He is not at all happy about the first one. Now, I suppose my hunch, again, this is my reading of it, and I'll be more than happy to be corrected on this. My reading is that mass conversions again suggest a certain lack of freedom. Mass conversions suggest a certain kind of, I mean, for the lack of a better phrase, herd mentality, right? So if 1,000 people are converting, then what it perhaps suggests is that there isn't really an inner dialogue that happened, right? Because, I mean, many of the people who convert, and if you go through some of their interviews and their recollections, they have a lot to say about what happened and why did they convert. So it's not that one fine morning you got up and you realized that it's not really, life doesn't really work that well as a Hindu, so might as well try a week as a Muslim. No, it doesn't really work that way. It's a fairly long and once in a while a very, very painful transition. People go through a lot before they become a Catholic or a Muslim or a Hindu or a Sikh or a Buddhist. No matter, I mean, you can just, keep adding to the list. Then Nehru's idea was that when there is an individual person who's converting, there is a certain dialogue that's happening. There's some amount of reflection. There is a conversation that's happening within the individual. And there is something presumably rational about the decision. There is a degree of freedom, right? There's something reasonable about this move. But when you have 100 people converting or 200 people embracing another religion, Nehru is absolutely skeptical about the presence of any rational argument, any rational sort of reason, any acceptable, reasonable premise to that development. So that's that. Lastly, in the secular state, when Nehru talks about meaning of secular, this is again to go back to communalism and casteism. When he says that secularism is not anti-religion, which means that, unlike the national common sense, we think, and the NCERT of all the books, I mean, the NCERT actually has the right information, but that's the irony of the country we live in. The textbooks have the right information, but the national common sense is so, I'm sorry for using this word, so disgustingly distanced from the actual stuff. So the textbook, the NCERT political science textbook tells us that secularism is not anti-religion. Secularism is anti-religious domination. So whenever you will have a religion dominating another religion, secularism will go against that. The secularism is going to oppose that. And whenever it's also against intra-religious domination. So for instance, when within a religious community, a particular sect is dominated, let's say it's denied, a particular sect is denied its rights and claims, again, secularism will come into the picture and do everything possible. So intra-religious and inter-religious. Secularism is not anti-religious at all. And Nehru has been talking about this since the 1950s because he could see that Indians are, for God knows for what mysterious reason, Indians are simply not able to understand something very basic. that to be secular is not to be anti-religion. In fact, in our own families, on a lighter note, in our own families, and this is something that I tell students all the time, that let's say if one of us goes to a university, and let's say we were a bit more particular about religious obligations before we went to the university, and let's say, unfortunately, we got into a liberal arts program, and we read a great deal of decoloniality and secularism and rationalization and this and that, and because you can't really do away with your family, once in a while you're back to the family, and there's this very, very not so pleasant occasion, which is the dinner, where all of us are there, and you can't resist. I mean, one of your elderly relatives makes a completely stupid argument, and you can't resist that because you still think that the classroom is everywhere. And you rip this premise apart. And the first thing that the elderly would say is, all right, you've become too secular. So if you become disrespectful to elderly, if you become a little less particular about religious obligations, if you become too critical about things, the first thing, as a derogatory remark, more importantly, is that you've become too secular. And so secular in that sense, again, the national common sense, unfortunately, secular is something that is completely devoid of the civilizational ethos, the religious etiquette, the essentials of the great Indian joint family, etc. So just to kind of end. Now, what exactly, what kind of a national integration does Indian secularism propose? And I'll come to Indian secularism now. So before getting into the question answer thing, let me just finish with Zishan's question and then open this up for comments and questions. So yes, Zishan, you're absolutely right. The Indian secularism is different from Western secularism. I wouldn't say French, Western secularism. I mean, of course, it started in France, but we don't call it French. In fact, French secularism is one of the most ridiculous things to discuss because that's the most hypocritical doctrines of the modern world. And people have written about it, that they call themselves secular, but guess what? They're not. They are outrageously biased in their dealings with ethnic religious minorities. But to kind of leave that aside, Western secularism, because the West had a very different experience of religion. If you think about the history of the West, and don't really have to go that much far back, but just from the ways in which the clergy and the king were in the church and the king were in an absolutely unholy alliance with each other. The Europeans have every reason to consider religion as something that is absolutely distasteful and disgusting. So being religious in Europe is not something that is mostly, for the most part, is appreciated because they have a very different history. I mean, all kinds of wrongs were committed in the name of religion. The church was the villain for God knows how many centuries. Now, as opposed to that, India has had a very different, I wouldn't say completely, but had a very different engagement with religion. Now, I'm not at all denying the fact that untouchability was practiced in the name of religion. All kinds of, patriarchy was sanctioned by religion. Of course, nobody is absolving religion of those ills and sins that were committed for God knows how many centuries again. But Indians have still a very different association with religion. And I think Nehru must be praised for this, if not for anything else, that despite being an atheist, despite being someone who genuinely believed that religion is complete nonsense, Nehru did not impose his ideas on the Indians. Nehru engaged with religion and introduced a secularism or made a case for a secularism that did not altogether disconnect itself from religion, that did not distance itself from religion. So because of our deep religious diversity, because Indian secularism emerged in deep religious diversity and at a time when the wounds of religion were very deep. So you had to do something where some kind of political authority also played a role, and you also expected a degree of reasonable understanding on the part of communities. So it is not just the state's business, it's also communities' business. So we as communities also need to play our part in the ways in which Indian secularism is to be executed in our day-to-day life. So because of the different contexts, we have different versions. So Indian secularism is about what Rajiv Bhargav has repeatedly called principled distance. right? So it is not distance, it's a principal distance. Religion and politics will be separated, but there are moments when politics will not be separated from religion. It will make an intervention, right? So the distance is principled. Whereas in the case of West, you don't really have any principal distance. It's a categorical separation. In fact, it is predicated on a principled separation between the religious and the political. And because we have a principal distance, what happens is you have minority institutions, you have aid for minority initiatives, and you have every possible, at least in the constitution, it is there. Now, of course, in the society, there's an unnecessary grievance and hue and cry around it. But in the constitution, it is categorically enshrined that minorities have a right to promote their culture. There are full-fledged articles and acts that talk about the protection of language, culture, etc., of minorities. And you have institutions that minorities can run for the promotion of their culture, and the states are going to aid these institutions. None of this happens in Western secularism. There's just no. And Indian secularism is also reformist. Western secularism is not. I mean, there are a bunch of other things as well, but I just don't want to go on about it. So I guess I will, I suppose I'll stop here. I have absolutely no idea how beneficial these very, very elementary remarks were, but my apologies for taking a little longer than expected. So I'll stop here, and I look forward to your thoughts, comments, and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Farooqi. Now we move on to the questions and answers session. I see Sabah has raised her hand. Sabah, please go ahead.
Good afternoon, sir. It was certainly beneficial, and the extra 5 minutes did not do any loss to our time. So I just want to ask you a question. There was a sentence that stuck with me, which is like Nehru is an advocate of modernity. So can I know more about what do you mean by modernity here? Like what sort of modernity do you think Nehru was an advocate of?
Behzad, are we going one by one, or should we take few questions and then?
We can take more if you want to.
Well, I think no. Let's if it's okay. I mean, I think.
Yeah, right now. Yeah, it's okay. It's okay for me.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So I'll just respond to Sabah's question
now. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Sabah. So yeah, what I meant was that there are different ways in which modernity is looked at, and there are very intelligent, sensible critiques of modernity as well in anthropology, history, etc. But when I say Nehru was an ardent advocate of modernity, what I meant to suggest was that Nehru was someone who believed in the primacy of change. And the modern, essentially, is premised on the idea of change. The modern, in fact, what should I say? The foundations of the modern have to do with dissociating itself from the pre-modern or the non-modern. And that's where the critique comes, right? So many social scientists, scholars, thinkers, the critique of modernity, and particularly from our friends from postmodernism, the critique of modernity has to do with its obsession with defining itself as something that is premised on a very different set of ideas. And of course, there is no denying that modernity. So modernity is something, if I were to kind of summarize, although there are multiple ways in which people have talked about it, and there are volumes after volumes, but modernity is something that brings the individual to the center of everything. So the individual is at the center. And between the collective and the individual, it's the individual who is primary and the collective is secondary, which means that you are not at all, in a modern setup, you're not at all supposed to get carried away by customs that have been followed for generations. You can very well question them because they don't make sense to you. Of course, now, there are things, I mean, there are scholars who have problematized this black and white understanding, but this is what the premise is: individualism, primacy of change, a dialogic mind, a multiplicity, plurality, and a certain kind of an identity sense that is always in the making, and not a fixed and definitive understanding of identity. So these are some of the things that remain very crucial to modernity. So it's more to do with life world, outlook, in a certain sense, frames of understanding the world. That's how, as a student of politics and society, I would like to pitch it. So this is what I had in mind when I said that Nehru was an ardent advocate of modernity. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, sir, that satisfies my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabah. Furqan?
Hello, sir. Professor Farooqi, right? Thank you for the lecture. And I was just going to talk about shortly, and also going to ask a short question about the secularism. I'm from Turkey and I'm living in Slovenia, and I was already, focusing more at the end part, like the last part, that you were speaking about the secularism, and you said that secularism is not an anti-religion and it is anti-religious domination, and to be secular is not to be anti-religious. This is actually a very nice description about it, and as I know, secularism is also a good thing for like separating things and letting them live their religion, but also not dominating a whole country and letting individuals live their own lives. But like you said, like a French secularism, they are not actually a real secularist when you're actually looking at it. They are not actually only anti-Islam or anti-other religion, but this is also they are like anti every religion. Like kinda you feel that in the society. What I was gonna ask, also another example in Turkey, we were also experiencing like a cruel secularism against Islam, and then another wave of Islam. Now it's in the Turkey, and it's kind of vicious circle. We are not experiencing a real secularism, and yeah, my question is, do you see any like a real secularist country like throughout the world history? Because as I see and as I experience in Europe, people are actually not, they don't want to see religious people in the special like positions, like especially in the government, especially in the other places, which is like high positioned. Is there any country that we can see in the world like doing a real secularism, like in a right way?
Well, thank you for this. Well, to be honest with you, I'm too inconsequential a person to kind of give a word on this. Based on my limited reading of global politics and some of the concerns that have emerged of late, in my opinion, questions of secularism remain unaddressed. I don't think there is any country that is secular the way in which we read about secularism, number one. And even if there are countries that kind of, that are uncritically accepted as secular. So let's say we're talking about Scandinavia, right? I'm thinking as I'm speaking. So this is not something that I had categorically prepared for. But my hunch is, again, as a student of politics, economy, interface, my hunch is that very often we consider countries as secular while looking at their development infrastructure, the welfare policy. So for instance, when we think of Finland as a secular country, what we have in mind is not as much about how different ethnic minorities are treated, but more importantly, the level of development. And it is assumed, and there's something very Nehruvian about it, unfortunately, it is assumed that a certain level of development is going to take care of all the differences, right? But we know very well that Nordic countries, Scandinavian countries, when the refugee crisis emerged in Europe, I think Sweden was the only exception. So Sweden kind of, was open about receiving refugees. But in Denmark, for instance, Denmark, Holland, refugees actually had to walk across the countries. Now, one might as well say that this is not directly related to secularism, and I agree with that. But I think secularism is not just about a certain position vis-a-vis politics, religion, separation. Secularism is also about a certain kind of political position that you take in the modern world, which is about dignity of individual, which is about a certain kind of a certain kind of political equality that you are willing to entertain. This is also part and parcel of the package called secularism. In the textbook, we are just reading a definition or two, but secularism is a much larger business. And any country, therefore, so for instance, in the case of India, I'm just giving an example. In the case of India, we think secularism is only to do with religion. But secularism is fundamentally committed to the principle of equality. Now, if that is something that we begin to entertain, then let's say if there is an atrocity against Dalit women, and if you're questioning that, it's a secular questioning. That's the argument, right? So if you're speaking against caste atrocities, you are being a secular person. You don't become a secular person only when you're speaking against communal riots or communal carnages or hatred and violence. Secularism is secular moves are moves that are taken, are measures that are taken in relation to safeguarding the tenets of equality in day-to-day life. So I really don't think, again, as I said, that I'm really not anyone of consequence. So please don't take my words seriously. But my submission is that secularism is, and people have written about it, that secularism is more of a charming and a very wooing kind of a reference. But when it comes to day-to-day life, and when we talk to people who come from marginalized backgrounds and who are vulnerable sections of society, whether we are talking about Norway or we're talking about New Zealand or we're talking about Canada, there are all kinds of narratives of despair that you come across. So unfortunately, the claims are way more exciting and delightful. But when it comes to the day-to-day life of the most marginalized and vulnerable sections of these societies, things are not really as heavenly as they were supposed to be.
If I'm not mistaken, you named the Scandinavian countries like a most secular in this today's world.
I said that they seem secular because they're doing very well in the HDI. So we tend to kind of confuse secularism with HDI. So very often we are thinking about the secular credentials of a country in terms of its welfare policies. But we know it for a fact that welfare, state-sponsored welfare, is not really welfare for all. We've seen this across millennia, right? So there is always a way in which state treats different subjects differently. And there's a fantastic article that I'll be happy to share. It's by Talal Asad. It's called "Where Are the Margins of the State?" It's a fantastic piece. It's a brilliant anthropology of the state, and particularly how state engages with the margins. And it tells us a great deal about the problems of secular living in the world we live in. Whether we talk about India or Pakistan or Scandinavia or Turkey, name a country, I think everywhere this concern remains. We can make all kinds of claims, but the fact of the matter is, end of the day, if the minorities are not happy, I'm sorry, there's just no entertaining the proposition. Right. So yeah, so that's what I would say.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer.
Thank you.
Furkan, Pragya.
Hi. So, this lecture has given us a lot of thought regarding critical thinking and, how to approach religion and, the diversity, etc. But on a more practical term, that's what I'm sort of looking for. Apart from maybe not reacting and, always being a dialogist, apart from that, what are some practical tips, when engaging in dialogue with, vis-a-vis religion or differences in politics, for that matter, is something that I would want to know your opinion on.
Well, it's a difficult question, Pragya, to be honest. I can just share with you what I think, and I really don't know if this really works. But you see, I actually passingly said that Nehru is being a little naive in proposing what he proposes in Intolerance, right? So it doesn't really work that way. It's not that simple. A person slaughtering a cow and expecting the other person to be tolerant doesn't really work that way. Day-to-day life is way messier than what textbooks tell us, right? And day-to-day life is also much more violent. A spark and things can just explode. So my submission is that the only way in which we can I mean, secularism to begin with has to be understood in terms of inter-community relations. It is not to be principally associated with the state, because we know very well that a lot of things that the state was assigned to do, I'm sorry, but the state miserably failed, not just in India, but across the world. So end of the day, and that's where I think the Gandhian position is very, very promising. It's very powerful, where people should take it upon themselves, a certain kind of moral basis of politics, a certain kind of moral basis of day-to-day living. And the only way in which we can bring about a certain kind of secular living is through traveling. Now, this might sound like a very elite proposition, but when I say traveling, I don't mean Bangkok and Dubai and London, and this is very unfortunate, when let's say you are away for a while and then you run into your friends and they ask you, where were you? And you say, well, I was traveling. They say, oh, which place? And then you say, oh, to a village in Jharkhand. They're suddenly disappointed beyond words, because traveling to Jharkhand or traveling to Bundelkhand is not traveling, for heaven's sake. Traveling is when you go to Maldives, to Mauritius, to Dubai, and London, and New York. But of course, people who traveled, particularly Gandhi, for instance, Gandhi learned a great deal by traveling, and he traveled pretty much across the country. And the reason I'm saying is that if you actually travel to different parts of the country, you genuinely realize what an extraordinary miracle this country is. It's just a complete miracle that the country hasn't really fallen apart. The kind of diversity that's there. And this diversity, no offense, we will never get to know from texts or lectures or programs. I can tell you about stuff that is eaten in Jharkhand or in the Northeast, but to go there and to sense, and to smell things and to see people and genuinely find oneself enriched by that experience, I think that is the only hope. Other than that, I don't think professors can do anything about this. I don't think political leaders can. We are done with that. Professors are more into publications. Professors are least interested in classroom discussions, unfortunately. I'm actually speaking against my own community, but I must indulge. And political leaders are a different breed altogether. So I think the only way in which we can do, and yes, one thing that I can definitely say is that there are still few universities that kind of help us understand differences. So a good university, not really the right word, an ideal university is a university that helps you know people from different communities and states and regions. And the reason why I always remain grateful to JNU as an institution is because when we were doing masters from 2004 to 6, this was many years ago. So when we were doing masters in 2004 to 6, I got to know people from Rajasthan, the Bhils of Rajasthan. They were there in our class. The Nagas, 2 Naga students were in my class. There was a Santhal in our class. There were tribals from Jammu and Kashmir. And of course, there were people from the metros and different. So pretty much, I think barring Gujarat, and if I'm not mistaken, Chhattisgarh, we had at least one student from every state of the country. Now, depending on how inquisitive we are, I mean, I really regret the fact that I did not really kind of learn as much as I could have during my masters. We were busy with our grades and presentations and assignments and all that nonsense. The real education was somewhere else. But whatsoever little we managed to discuss and interact, we got to know a lot about India. So, I mean, I wouldn't say it's really an alternative to traveling, but a great university, a great classroom is always very helpful in terms of developing that respect for difference. And now that I think about it, I'm done in the sense that no matter what I get to know, I am beyond repair. I have understood things about Indian diversity, and there is no way in which that understanding of mine, fortunately, can be compromised. And this is something that I learned. I did not really travel as much, so I have not really walked the talk, as it were. But this is definitely something that happened in the university classrooms. So I suppose if we could have universities that are not parochial, but more importantly, actually in a certain sense, national. So when you say a national central university, the idea is that we should have students from different parts of the country, so that, let's say the university is next door to my place. But when I go to the university, I should get to meet people from Jharkhand, from Andhra, from Telangana, from Jammu and Kashmir. And that's a wonderful experience to begin with. That's the only thing that I can think of. I really don't have any other solid program. This is a very humble proposition, but it might be slow, but I'm sure it'll be effectual in the long run. That's what I would say.
Thank you for mentioning Jharkhand. I'm right now in Jharkhand, so just yeah. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Arokya?
Professor, I sincerely appreciate you for your coherent presentation on different topics. I have two questions. I presume to have heard you replacing indifference to tolerance. I mean, you said we are not tolerant, but we are indifferent.
Nehru said that. Yeah.
Okay. So we don't spend much time or energy in knowing other culture, other religion. We live in a subcontinent. We have plenty of cultures, plenty of languages, religions. And only imagine that we should be having more conflicts, violence than what we see today. That's my first question. And second one is about...
Sorry, can you repeat your question? Can you just repeat your question? Why is it?
Don't you imagine that we should be having more conflicts, divisions than what we have today, because India is a subcontinent filled with plenty of cultures, languages. So I mean, there is already a kind of understanding, opening up towards others. So that's my position. So that's the first one. Second one is about the individual conversion and mass conversion. Now, Nehru is able to accept the individual conversion, but he is very negative about mass communication. But I think the individual reflection or reasoning of one person is able to influence a mass, or a mass is able to identify its reflection and reasoning with the individual person's reasoning and reflection. So I don't see any problem with that, because if a group is able to identify itself with someone, it's quite okay, because they are convinced by the reflection of somebody. Thank you.
Just a moment. I'm just typing it down so that I don't forget. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for this. So you see, I mean, as I said, that this is Nehru saying, not me. I wish I was that promising in my prose and articulation. So alas, it's not my formulation. But yeah, I mean, this point that you made, that, isn't it the case that, given the staggering, alarming diversity that we have, there should have been more conflict? I think, I mean, there is a certain concern there, and I agree with that. The concern that is contributing to this query. But as some of the scholars who are not really appreciated that much, because they take a very different position. Their academic position is not very charming. People like Ashish Nandi and others. So the argument is that there is a certain civilizational depth that India has. And people are, for the most part, they're accommodative in any case. And this is again not to kind of bring in some kind of cultural nationalism nonsense, but all I'm saying is that India has had an extraordinary legacy of accommodation. There is absolutely no denying that. Different religions not only entered India, but more importantly, religions emerged from India, new religions, counter traditions, as it were. So my submission is that people, whether they are aware of secularism or not, there is a certain temperament that people have vis-a-vis accommodation in India, right? I think we need to live with that. Otherwise, it'll be very difficult. It'll be a depressing existence. We need to live with that idea that people in general are motivated by accommodation and mutual understanding. But the question is that in moments of crisis, what we have seen, and I think this is something that Nehru was pointing out, that in moments of crisis, what happens is that we are just not able to stand shoulder to shoulder. And this is something that we've seen off late as well. That, people have, you have, what should I say? Things are really bleak and gloomy right now. You have people carrying out rallies in support of a rapist. Right? So I think easily we should outnumber these rallies. You have rallies in support of convicts. You have rallies in support of people who are indulging in hate speech and hate violence and so on. So what we have seen is that there's a way in which, and I think this is something that Nehru was talking about, that in times of crisis, when the genuine secular tolerant spirit is needed, we are found missing. Right? It's almost like, if I may indulge, it's almost like, and I'm reminded of a fascinating paper, an article that Maulana Muhammad Ali Jawhar wrote in 1926 after the Khilafat movement had dismantled and the Hindu-Muslim question had once again become a very important question. So he wrote about something that, reminded me, when I read it, it reminded me of Titanic. So he writes that, when the ship is in smooth waters, everything is absolutely fine. People are behaving nicely. You have etiquette in place. You have well-mannered individuals. Everyone is maintaining boundaries and whatnot. But the moment it's a storm and you know that the ship is going to sink, and these are Jawhar's words. He says that you need the captain with a gun to make sure that you fall in line, right? And if you've watched Titanic, there is actually a frame where people from the lower sections, they just can't wait because the ship is going to sink and they do not want to die simply because they couldn't afford a first-class ticket. So the captain actually has to take out a gun because people are simply not following the order. Something that is so fundamental, that ladies first, old women first, old people first. It's so fundamental. Now, but the point is that it just doesn't happen. So again, I think the crisis, when in moments of crisis, we can do much better. That is something that's not happening. And for that, I think a certain kind of secular insistence on secular living and a certain kind of respect and reverence vis-a-vis multiculturalism, pluralism, etc., mutual understanding is must. The second question, your formulation is one way of looking at it. This whole idea of no problem with group conversion, absolutely. I think that's fine. But I think Nehru was looking at it a certain way. That anything, because Nehru again is someone who believes in individual thought. He is not really someone who will side with herd mentality. He is not, forget everything else. He did not follow a lot of things that Gandhi said, although he is considered as one of those disciples of Gandhi, and he had great things to say about the Mahatma. He had a remarkable reverence for Mahatma Gandhi, but he wouldn't listen to Gandhi in relation to a number of things. So I think that is the concern, that individual conversion is something that might be a result of a very prolonged reflection, dialogue, an inner conversation, whereas mass conversion is something that is a result of some kind of an influence that cannot be rationally articulated about. So that's what I would say.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Sir, we have half an hour to go, and I see 5 people have raised hands. So can we take 2-3 questions? Questions.
Well, we can go one by one. I don't think.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. Then Dipanshu.
Yeah. Thank you, sir, for your insightful lecture. I have a question. Like you said, and you quoted that a lot of historians and research scholars have pointed out that in context of Gandhi-Ambedkar conflict, and that when Gandhi went on to fast unto death, so you said that it was an immoral act of Gandhi. So I would like to know more about why it was immoral and how they are saying it is immoral, if it can be.
Yeah, sure. There's a fantastic storyteller. I call him a storyteller, although he's a great scholar, but I call him a storyteller. Tridip Surud. Surud was the caretaker of the Sabarmati Ashram, Ahmedabad, for a long time. I think now he is not there. He is part of a university. So Tridip Surud, what he used to do, we did a course together. I mean, course together as in he was the in charge and I was the student. So for 15 days, he speaks on Gandhi. 9 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock in the evening. There's just a lunch break and there are 2 coffee breaks, 15 minutes each. So imagine for 15 days, a man is speaking without a chit in his hand. So he is an excellent storyteller and you don't get bored of it. He's just amazing. So anyways, Tridip Surud in his biography of Gandhi, in his lectures, in some of his reflections has talked about it, that fast for Gandhi was actually a moral quest. Right? When you are fasting, it's a moral quest. There is something very moral about its premise. Now, when Gandhi went against Ambedkar, it was an immoral quest in the sense that Gandhi deep down knew that what he was fighting for, I think that is for the first time perhaps, that the Mahatma knew very well that he was doing something that he was not supposed to do. But he just went ahead. The man was ridiculously stubborn. He went ahead and he went on fast unto death. And the proof that people have for this fast being immoral and other fasts being moral is that if you look at the fasts that Gandhi sat onto later on in his life, this fast, in this particular fast, the third day, Gandhi was on bed. Gandhi was so damn weak and fragile, he could not even speak. And there are accounts of Gandhi Ambedkar meeting. Gandhi could not even get up from the cot. So Ambedkar actually had to, as it were, get closer to Gandhi's mouth because Gandhi could not even speak loudly. He was so weak. Third day. Fourth day, he was bordering dead. Now, January 1948, few days before his assassination, Gandhi is on fast unto death for communal harmony. And Gandhi goes on for 11 or 13 days, if I remember correctly. And he's fine. Gandhi has already grown much older. His health has deteriorated, but he's doing much better. Whether it's the fast in Bengal, or it's the fast in Patna, or it's the fast in Delhi, and all of these fasts were for communal harmony, Gandhi is fine. He's attending prayer meetings, he's singing bhajans, he's giving lectures, he's writing letters. Of course, he's weak. And this is something that is very important, that when he is doing this against the separate electorate demand, he is himself not convinced. And that is although Ambedkar was compelled to sign, but as everyone knows that it was Ambedkar who won that. Gandhi lost it completely. Although historians would always record it as Ambedkar who kind of compromised. But the battle was won by Ambedkar because Ambedkar was morally right. Gandhi was not. Gandhi's position was very, in a certain sense, it was very selfish. And fasting and self don't go hand in gloves. They don't go together. So this is the proof. So this is something that Tridip Surud has talked about, that, fourth day, Gandhi was on the cot. He was terribly, and Ambedkar was scared because if Gandhi died, then the upper caste people would have finished the untouchables, the so-called lower caste people of the country. So Ambedkar did not want to do that. Ambedkar was anyone but selfish. So Ambedkar went ahead and signed the document, the agreement, the Pune Pact, as we call it. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. Ashraf?
Thank you for your wonderful lecture. I am a graduate with major in pluralism, religious pluralism. And I think the term in Indian context, we can use the pluralism instead of secularism, as it is different from French secularism. To what extent it is correct to use the term pluralism instead of secularism in Indian context?
Well, yeah. There are different ways in which political theorists, philosophers have engaged with these terms. But the problem, the lacking bit of pluralism is that it does not bring about any obligation vis-a-vis the state. So pluralism is a direct reference to different communities living, like a plural society. So we are essentially pluralism, pluralistic, plural, etc. So the state's obligations don't really come into being. Now in secularism, there is a full-fledged obligation vis-a-vis the state. And more importantly, there is also a certain obligation that communities have vis-a-vis each other. So secularism in that sense becomes more demanding a doctrine, a philosophy, a position, right? As opposed to pluralism. And people actually went ahead and talked about multiculturalism. Gurpreet Mahajan, senior professor at JNU, is one of the stalwarts of that. Bhiku Parekh, who's based in England, Sir Lord Bhiku Parekh, as it were. These are stalwarts of multiculturalism, but people have gone beyond multiculturalism as well. And of all the people, Angela Merkel, the German chancellor, talked about the death of multiculturalism because of new developments in Germany, in France, in England. So, I mean, we will keep having newer references, but I think most of these references have to do with what is the state of affairs vis-a-vis society. But what the distinctive bit about secularism, and I think something that provides it an edge, is that it is not, it's not something that just tells us about living, but it's more of an obligation vis-a-vis state and how, vis-a-vis state in terms of how it's going to treat its people, citizens, and also how different groups are going to interact with each other. What will be the overall, in a certain sense, what will be the set of protocols in terms of a healthy, harmonious living. So that's what I would say. Thank you.
Sakshi?
Thank you. Professor, you talked about modernity in the way how Nehru perceived it. And also, I just want to put it here that Gandhi also have a very different view about modernity, but somehow a very common view that attached both of them is how they perceive the individual essence and the individualism in their context of modernity. So when I perceive or when I read and when I see about modernity, what I see in it, I think that modernity puts the individual forward in the community. So how do you think secularism can actually function or can actually maintain its relevance in this new system or in this new era of globalization and modernity where individuals are the main essence of society, where individuals feel threatened if someone questions them, even if a single person, that why are you wearing this or why are you doing this? So how do you think secularism can function or accommodate it?
Well, so, I mean, if we go back to the origins of secularism, the 19th century mandate, there is a way in which, so for instance, when they say, so there's a fantastic book, it's called, if I'm not mistaken, it's called Public Religions and the I don't know, I'm forgetting the second half of the title. It's by Jose Casanova, who's considered as a great scholar, one of the great scholars on secularism. So he talks about secularization as a process. And one of the things that he talks about in that work is secularization is privatization, which essentially means that it's to do with so in a secular world or in a secular society, religion would be private affair. So religion has to do with the individual, right? So, which is also about expanding the scope of freedom. So let's say I live in a family. My family is a family of devout religious Muslims or Hindus or Christians, but I don't want to follow any of that, right? And I have every right to not follow any of that, right? Nobody can, and this is secularism is kind of, it's also offering, and it's one of the basic tenets of secularism, it's offering that space. In fact, if we go back to Nehru, when Nehru says it's inner development, this is the distinction that he's making. He is actually bringing secular religion to the individual and not necessarily as a collective sentiment. That it's your association with the philosophy. How you make sense of it, it's completely up to you. You think it's completely absurd, you are absolutely right to think along those lines. You think it's the most fascinating thing, you are right to think about that as well. Now, in relation to globalization, I think globalization is not something that can only be talked about as an economic phenomenon. And this is something that economists, social scientists in general have drawn our attention to. That culturally as well, globalization positions itself very forcefully, right? Culturally, politically. So as a result, what has happened is that there are certain discourses that have become very hegemonic. So for instance, secular discourse of a certain kind has also become very hegemonic. And people have written about it, that how it has suddenly become very cool to be secular. Or, if you kind of go against religion, it has a certain edge, as opposed to if you are someone who is pro-religion. So it's almost like if you speak in favor of religion, there is a certain apologetic that people find in you. So this is to do with the hegemony of a certain discourse. Now, the fact of the matter is that apparently we are living in a world where all expressions are at par. But the moment you begin to think about it a little carefully and you begin to kind of embark on a more perceptive reading of the ways in which our lives are entangled with these institutions and aspirations, you begin to realize that there are few things that are automatically superior, right? So writing in favor of religion, writing against religion, you know very well. So the Richard Dawkins of the world will have a very different following as compared to, I'm not at all saying that preachers don't have following, which is it can be a very shady following as well, the following that preachers have. But all I'm trying to point out is that as far as the the educated lot is concerned, people who look a certain way, people who talk a certain way, people who are found doing something in a public space. So let's say there's an individual who's found praying in one corner in an airport. I really don't think that most of us would think that he or she could be educated. We think that, again, to borrow from Nehru, relics of the bygone era. So there is a certain wiring, unfortunately. And I think secularism, in true sense of the term, should undo that. Because secularism, again, there is a possibility in being religious as well. You can very well be a devout Hindu, Muslim, and so on, and yet be an extraordinary citizen, an absolute resource for the country and so on. The issue is, and I'll just take a minute here, the issue arises when, quote unquote, now here I'm using quote unquote, when secular liberal intellectuals begin to mock at religion. Now that's an issue, and particularly in a country like India. And I might ruffle a few feathers here, but I'm willing to take the risk. In the 1990s, when the Ram Janmabhoomi movement kind of acquired a certain form and became very forceful, one of the things that many of our great intellectuals did, unfortunately, was that they started mocking at Ram. Right? So they were calling Ram a chauvinist. They called Ram as an ahistorical figure, Ramayana as complete nonsense. And they thought logically, all of this might be right. I mean, you go back to Ramayana and you read that, yes, you realize that Ram did ask Sita to actually prove her chastity. And as a student of gender studies, you realize this is absolutely absurd. But there are ways in which mythologies work. And I'm sorry, if you can't understand this in India, then, we can have a conversation, a very private conversation about it. But if in gatherings, if we start mocking, so if people are mocking temples and if people are saying that the new structure is hideous, this is not being secular. I'm sorry. This is only going to make things worse. Because let's be very honest about one thing, that there is a way in which religion speaks to us, speaks to each one of us differently, right? So the manifestation of religious belonging varies from individual to individual. I, as an individual, might be okay with you criticizing my icons, right? I'm okay with it. I might be willing to invest in a dialogue. But there are lakhs and millions of people in India for whom Ram is a savior. Period. Done. You can't enter into it's sacrosanct, I'm afraid. The only thing that you can do is teach them gender studies and then talk and let them figure out on their own. Don't tell them that Ram was a sexist chauvinist. I'm sorry, that's not working. You teach them, you bring them to hardcore gender studies courses, let them study their feminism, understand what masculinity, femininity is, understand the connections between religion and patriarchy, mythology and patriarchy, and then arrive at their own conclusions. Let them have their own Ram. Please don't mock. And this is something that many of our intellectuals, great intellectuals, they've done some brilliant work on secularism, nationalism, etc. But they were indulging in this, and now they are regretting it. But I'm sorry, it's a bit late now. The die has been cast. Things have already gotten out of our hands. And this is something that very often, many of our intellectuals, when they get carried away, they do this, right? So a range of things, any practice related to any religion. Let's not, as long as that practice is not forced down my throat, I don't think I should really comment on that, because it's fine. I mean, this is the way it is. Nehru did not really speak against these practices. Of course, in his private letters, he had a lot of things to say about them. But as a public leader, and Nehru is an epitome of secularism. Who could possibly be more secular? Although he had his moments of religiosity as well. And for that, he is critiqued to no end. Or I would say his moments of communalism, to kind of be more politically incorrect. But that's the way it is. So, and I think that is where we are missing out on, because the dialogue is not going to happen by mocking. So I could be a great intellectual. I write an editorial in Indian Express where I'm ripping apart something that's very central to a Hindu imagination or a Muslim imagination or whatever. It doesn't work. It might work in the West, but as of now, we are not in the West. When we migrate, then we can indulge in all kinds of free inquiry and critical rationalism and whatnot. But as of now, I think we need to hold our horses and understand that the demands of sensibility, as it were. I mean, what does a sensible critique or engagement or understanding require? So I think that's the whole bit in relation to this whole globalization, identity assertions, multiplicity, etc. So,
great. Thank you, sir. So we're running out of time, and we still have 4 people who want to
we can. I'll try to be. If you're indirectly trying to tell me that I need to be.
Let's club some questions.
I'll do that. So quickly, let's do this.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Simra, and then Pushpika. Simra first.
Yeah. Hello, sir. So
Hi.
the question is that we've been seeing that Nehru as a model for secularism and everything, but there was a demand for reservation for Muslims prior to the two-nation theory. So the demand was clearly denied by INC. So can we say this thing that all this inner development and outer developments, all this is just bookish, and in a way, Nehru is, when he's writing such things or he's propagating such things, he's in a way trying to be the leader of a secular nation, India, rather than what he actually was believing on.
Well, I mean, as I said, that Nehru had his moments of communalism to be. I mean, these are the ways in which, you see, much of what you got to read is post-independence. And I mean, one thing that we definitely know about post-independence Nehru is his absolutely unapologetic commitment to an India that is free of communalism. And I think the most definitive testimony to that is letters to chief ministers. You read letters to chief ministers from start to finish. There's hardly a letter that you will find in which Nehru is not asking his chief ministers to make sure that communal harmony prevails, or make sure that communal riots don't take over, communal frenzy doesn't take over, because the minority trust is very important, particularly after partition. So, I mean, of course, there are a lot of things that he says and he doesn't do. But end of the day, I think we are reading the text, and we are trying to find meaning in what is written. There could be another discussion on Nehru the person, but I don't think that will be as pleasant as this one. So Nehru the writer and Nehru the person, you could have all kinds of things to say about him. He had a very wicked sense of humor as well. So there are things that could be talked about, but I would say that as of now, we are just restricting ourselves to the text, and the text kind of suggests some of the things that we discussed over the past hour and a half, hour and 3/4.
Pushpika?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for the wonderful session. Sir, so as per the lecture, can we say that, dialogic mindset could be a possible futile, remedy towards the persisting indifference?
Absolutely. There is absolutely no denying that. Dialogue is always, whether we talk about dialogue in this context or dialogue in general, vis-a-vis social, political life, dialogue is always a remedy to all kinds of rifts and tensions and frictions. But yeah, definitely in this case, indifference essentially implies not just absence of dialogue, but as I said earlier as well, a complete meaninglessness vis-a-vis dialogue. That dialogue is not considered, it is not considered significant anymore. And I think indifference is also a situation, perhaps what Nehru is suggesting, if I may indulge, where people are not even thinking about dialogue. So when dialogue is outside your realm of ideas, that's as tragic as things could be. One is that you know about dialogue, you don't indulge in it, you don't invest in it. The other is it's not even at the periphery of your cognition. I think that's uncommonly tragic. There's nothing more tragic. That's Shakespearean in a certain sense, right? So that's something that I thought that he had in mind. So yes, absolutely. Dialogue is something that is going to check indifference in its tracks. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Pushpika. Charu?
Thank you, sir, for such an insightful session. I might have a doubt regarding one of the things which you said earlier. You talked about inner development and external development, which Nehru emphasized that for inner development to happen, a certain amount of external development is a must. So don't you feel that it is something promoting materialism or materialistic thinking about? If I'm I'm not sure that if this is a correct question or not, maybe I am understanding the whole idea in a different way.
Are you in South Asian University by any chance? I see the curtain and I was kind of a little alarmed by the telling resemblance. But anyways, so you see, as I pointed out, well, Nehru was definitely someone who believed, he was a student of Marxism. And Marxism, we know, the foundational principle of Marxism is materialist conception of history. So Nehru, in that sense, did have a certain sympathy vis-a-vis material needs is more important than ideas. Of course, he did not really carry on with this allegiance post-independence, and he kind of drifted a little, but he did consider Marx as one of the most foundational thinkers of the human race. So yes, but as I was pointing out earlier, that there is a way in which Nehru is kind of tweaking the entire discussion. So when he's talking about the primacy of the outer development, I think what he's talking about is that no matter what the promise of the inner calling or the self-realization or the dialogue within, end of the day, what is more important is your contribution to stuff that's happening outside. So you need to have a certain kind of infrastructural development, material development, and bare minimum is a must because, and I think what he's trying to suggest, and this is something that you find in other letters and reports and essays of Nehru, that let's say if you're not able to do anything about mitigating poverty, alleviating poverty, forget about anything in relation to religion, culture, civilization. But all of that is secondary. The first and foremost question is vis-a-vis poverty, equality, justice, and so on. And this is all very material. It's all very, shall we say, it's all very tangible in the sense that these are things that need to be seen. So I suppose that he's being Nehru, as simple as that, because he would always, in fact, one of his disagreements with Gandhi in relation to the question of religion had to do with the fact that Gandhi never considered development central to what should I say, to religiosity or to human development, as it were. Gandhi had a very modest understanding or a very modest take on development, infrastructure, etc. Whereas Nehru was always very grand about it. He had some grand ideas about most of these things. So even when he is engaging with a possible, shall I say, interpretation of religion, he is kind of casting it in a way that favors his premise, which is that infrastructural development is primary, and then this whole thing can just go on privately. So this religion as a private affair is something that Nehru would stick to, but this might not really take us very far unless and until we have at least bare minimum of infrastructure in place. So he is, in that sense, materialist. These days when we use materialism or materialist, we use in a dichotomous sense, as a binary, spiritual, material. But in history, social science, materialism is not necessarily a negative thing. Materialism is a position. It's a philosophical, it's an epistemological position that we have. So yeah, the primacy of basic needs. So in that sense, yes, it could very well be said what you argued.
Thank you. Finally, Nasir Hussain. Last question.
Thank you, sir, for having an outstanding lecture, sir. Sir, as you
Nasir, can you please be a little louder? I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sir, as you have said that that Gandhi was in favor of conversion and he was against mass conversion.
Nehru.
So you don't. Gandhi, sir.
Not Gandhi. Nehru. Gandhi had different things to say about conversion. Nehru.
No, sir. You were saying that Gandhi was in favor of conversion and Ambedkar was in favor of mass conversion.
No, my friend. I said Gandhi was in favor of not in favor of separate electorates. Well, my memory is an embarrassment, but I just hope I didn't say this. I said Gandhi was not in favor of separate electorate for the untouchables, the depressed classes. Ambedkar was in favor of, was making a case for separate electorates. Okay. Gandhi was always against conversion. Gandhi had a very different philosophy in relation to conversion. Sorry, go ahead.
Ambedkar was in favor of mass conversion, sir.
Ambedkar actually ended up converting to Buddhism with several thousand followers. So he did mass conversion. But I don't know whether he was in favor of mass conversion or not. I think it's difficult to say that. Although I think he would have loved definitely for all Hindus to go to some other religion, but I wouldn't really take chances here. I wouldn't say that on record.
Okay. Sir, my question is basically like if there is a mass conversion, would it not be against the ethos of secularism? And
technically it wouldn't be. If you were to go by the mandate of the Indian Constitution, there's nothing wrong with mass conversions. Because if you can have rallies to promote religion, let's say there's an open rally and I'm talking about the merits of Islam or Christianity or Hinduism, and let's say I'm a fascinating speaker and I'm sincere to the core. I touch the hearts of hundreds of people, and by the time I'm done with the sermon, there's a queue outside. And people are saying, sir, we want to embrace the religion that you come from. To hell with whatever we are. So technically, there's nothing wrong with that. But as I said, that in social life, there are serious repercussions as a result of this. So if suddenly, and this is something that happened, if you think of history of modern India, the Charter Act 1813, when the missionaries were allowed to and this was a very colonial, very, very shrewd policy, when a lot of people started converting from lower caste backgrounds and tribal backgrounds to Christianity, you had no other option but to have a Shuddhi movement. The Anand Saraswati actually enters into, and Hinduism is endowed with a full-fledged process of conversion. Before the 19th century, Hinduism does not have a process of conversion. You want to be a Hindu, people would say, all right, you want to be a Hindu, you've become a Hindu, done. There is hardly anything there. You want to be a Muslim, there is a full-fledged process for that, right? You want to be a Parsi, there's a full-fledged, in fact, in Parsis, it won't work. In Jews, it won't work. You want to be a Christian, you want to be a Sikh, there is a process. But in Hinduism, till as late as the mid-19th century, no process. You want to be a Hindu, you've become a Hindu, done. But 1860s, 70s onwards, there's a full-fledged process because people who were converting left, right, and center from tribal areas, from lower caste backgrounds, they were to be brought back in, right? So the Anand Saraswati massively got into it, and the entire Arya Samaj movement is a result of that. So mass conversions on their own, it's fine because individuals are free to do whatever they want to do. But in the social life, it can actually disturb things, which is not to say that mass conversions shouldn't be there. And if there are mass conversions, there are mass conversions. but our lives get, intercommunity relations also get quite disturbed by mass conversions. I mean, this is something that we've seen. Thankfully, there are no mass conversions happening as of now as we speak. God's being kind to us. But if mass conversions were to take place, we really don't know what will happen. This country might just explode then. So that's what I think. So constitutionally, it's fine. You speak to any advocate, he'll say this is perfectly all right. He might also cite the article, the section, etc., to prove his point or her point. But as far as the social life is concerned, there are serious, severe, unintended consequences.
Sir, as you have said that technically it is right, mass conversion is right. And if you see the provisions given in the constitution, sir, like if you see Article 25 of Indian Constitution, it is like you can practice a religion by your conscience, by applying your conscience. So wouldn't it wouldn't it be against your conscience if you are having a mass conversion, sir? Means like if you are influencing by someone and just you get mass conversion, would it not be against your conscience?
See, conscience is again a very subjective reference, right? So for instance, I want to convert. Now you will never be able to figure out whether my motivations are driven by some lucrative offer or some genuine salvation stuff, right? Or some genuine existential stuff that I find in the other religion. So this conscience, I'm sorry, I was about to say conscience nonsense. Maybe it has been some time. We need to finish this session now. This conscience business, the conscience reference, because in sociology, we talk about conscience a great deal. One of our stalwarts, Emil Durkheim, spent his life talking about it. So conscience is a very subjective position, and it can be defined from the vantage point of the individual. So it's my conscience, and I have realized that I should go to that religion. In mass conversions as well, because in the Constitution, there is nothing that says against anything against mass conversion, you could very well have a collective conscience. Again, to go back to Durkheim, you could have a new thinking, right? I mean, if Dalits in huge numbers want to embrace another religion, be it Christianity or Sikhism or Buddhism or Islam or whichever, what do you do about it? They are absolutely, but as I said, it's a very tricky business. It's a very tricky, complicated, layered phenomenon, and we are just not able to figure it out, because on the one hand, it's about the question of freedom, that you are free to do this, but at the same time, you're also living in a society. And when you do this, there's a way in which, especially when you do this in large numbers, there's a way in which it disrupts the flow of social political life. It shouldn't, but it does. And that's where the issue arises.
Okay, thank you, Nasir. So with this, we come to the end of our today's very interesting session. Thank you, Dr. Irfanullah Farooqi, for your time. And thank you all for your questions and feedback. I'll see you all next week on Wednesday. I'll share the reflection form just in a while. So please fill it up by 6 p.m. tomorrow. Thank you, sir. Thank you once again.
Well, thank you again for being exceptionally patient and for excellent comments and questions. I hope that this will be a preface to something more meaningful in the years to come. Thank you once again for your time. Stay well, stay safe, take good care, and good luck with the rest of the course.